3 weeks ago, I sold the house that was supposed to be my daughter's inheritance after she hired security guards with my photo to keep me away from her $200,000 wedding. Look, I know how that sounds, but let me explain because this situation is absolutely insane, and I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind completely. My daughter Sabrina is 28, and I raised her alone after her mother, Bernice, died when she was 12. I worked 2 jobs for years to put her through college, paid for her apartment during grad school, and basically sacrificed everything so she could have the life I never had. We were close, or at least I thought we were, until she met this guy, James, 3 years ago. James comes from old money. His family owns multiple properties, and his mother, Molly, has never worked a day in her life, but acts like she built an empire. The first time I met him at a family barbecue, he spent the entire afternoon making comments about my 2018 Toyota Camry and asking if I knew any good mechanics because clearly I needed help maintaining my vehicle properly. I brushed it off because Sabrina seemed happy, but looking back, that should have been my first red flag. The problem started getting worse after they got engaged last year. Sabrina began making comments about how embarrassed she was when her friends met me, how I didn't understand proper etiquette for fancy restaurants, how my work clothes were inappropriate for certain events. She started insisting I needed to dress better if I wanted to be seen with them in public. When I reminded her that I was still paying off the loan I took to cover her graduate degree, she told me that was my choice, and she never asked me to sacrifice my wardrobe for her education. The breaking point came 6 months ago when she called me to discuss wedding plans. She explained that James' family was handling most of the arrangements since they were paying for everything and they had very specific standards about the guest list and presentation. She said her future mother-in-law, Molly, had reviewed photos of me from family events and decided I would need a complete makeover if I wanted to attend the ceremony. I asked what kind of makeover she was talking about, and Sabrina laid out this whole list. I needed to lose 30 pounds, get my teeth professionally whitened, buy a custom suit from their preferred tailor, and take etiquette classes to learn how to behave appropriately around their social circle. She said Molly was willing to pay for the teeth whitening as a gift, but everything else was my responsibility if I wanted to be there for her special day. When I told her this was ridiculous and that I raised her better than to care about superficial garbage like this, she completely lost it. She started screaming about how I never understood what was important to her, how I was selfish for not wanting to make an effort for the most important day of her life, and how James' family already thought she came from nothing because of me. Then she said the thing that really broke everything between us. She told me that James had been asking questions about my background and income, and she was tired of making excuses for why her father was just a maintenance supervisor instead of someone respectable, like a doctor or lawyer. She said she loved me, but she was ashamed of where she came from. And if I couldn't respect her enough to present myself properly at her wedding, then maybe I shouldn't be there at all. I hung up on her and didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. She finally texted me saying she had talked to James and they decided I could attend the wedding if I agreed to sit in the back with distant relatives and avoid the reception photos. She said this was a compromise and I should be grateful they were including me at all. That was when I started making my own plans. I spent the next 4 months getting my finances in order and consulting with lawyers about updating my estate planning. I also started looking into the property values in my neighborhood since the house I bought 15 years ago had appreciated significantly. The same house that Sabrina always assumed would be hers someday since I had mentioned it in casual conversations about the future. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a text message that made everything crystal clear. Sabrina wrote that she had hired professional security for the event and given them my photo with instructions to treat me as a potentially dangerous individual who might try to disrupt the ceremony. She said James' family was concerned about my emotional stability based on my reaction to their reasonable requests and they couldn't risk any incidents on their special day. The text continued with more details that honestly left me speechless. She explained that she had told the security team I was a stalker who might show up uninvited, and they were authorized to call police if I came anywhere near the venue. She said she was blocking my number after sending this message. And if I tried to contact her through other means, she would file a restraining order against me. But wait, it gets better. 3 days later, James sent me a photo through Instagram of both of them laughing while standing next to my car in the parking lot of a restaurant where I had taken Sabrina for dinner the previous month. The caption read, This is exactly why we don't want trash at our $200,000 wedding. He had tagged several of his friends in the post and included laughing emojis. The final insult came when Molly sent me a friend request on Facebook just so she could send me a private message. She wrote that her son deserved better than my worthless bloodline, and she was relieved they had decided to cut ties with me before I could embarrass their family any further in front of their social circle. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made some phone calls. The real estate agent I contacted was very enthusiastic about my property, especially since comparable houses in the neighborhood had been selling well above asking price. The estate lawyer I met with was extremely thorough in explaining my options for updating beneficiaries on all my accounts and policies. For days after the wedding I wouldn't attend, my phone started buzzing with notifications I had been waiting months to see. But that's a story for the next update, because you guys are not going to believe what happened when Sabrina found out what I had actually been planning all this time. Update 1. Holy crap, you guys. The response to my first post was incredible and honestly gave me the strength to keep going with this whole situation. Some of you asked for an update on what happened when Sabrina found out about my real estate moves. So, here we go. First off, shout out to the commenter who said I should have started planning my revenge the minute she called me trash. You were absolutely right. I had been thinking about this scenario for months, just waiting for them to push me far enough to actually pull the trigger. So, remember how I mentioned my phone started buzzing for days after the wedding? At 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, my phone went absolutely insane with notifications. Sabrina had somehow gotten a new number because she had blocked me from her original one, and she was sending me message after message in complete panic mode. The messages started with her asking why I hadn't tried to contact her since the wedding to apologize for my behavior. She said she had expected me to at least send flowers or a card, acknowledging that I understood why they had to make those difficult decisions about my attendance. She wrote that James had been asking when I was planning to reach out and make amends because they were willing to consider having a relationship with me again if I demonstrated real change. But then the tone shifted completely around 3:47 a.m. She sent a message that just said, "Who did you sell the house to?" And I knew her lawyer had finally called her back with the news I had been waiting to deliver. What happened was this. I had put the house on the market the week before her wedding, but I specifically requested that the sale close exactly 4 days afterward. The timing was not a coincidence, people. I wanted her to have her perfect wedding day with all their fancy friends before reality hit her like a truck. The buyer was a young couple who had been looking in the neighborhood for months, and they were so excited to find a place in their budget that they agreed to my timeline without any questions. The sale went through for $485,000, which was about $60,000 more than I had expected thanks to the market conditions. But here's the thing that really sent Sabrina into a tailspin. She had been telling James for over a year that the house was worth at least $600,000 and that she would inherit it plus all the equity when I retired. She had apparently been using my property as some kind of financial security blanket in conversations with his family, convincing them that she wasn't as poor as they thought. The messages kept coming throughout Thursday morning. She was demanding to know where I was planning to live now, whether I had discussed this decision with her first, and why I would make such a major financial choice without considering how it would affect her future plans. Around noon, she called me from James' phone because I had blocked her new number after reading her overnight freakout session. When I answered, she immediately started talking about how confused and hurt she was by my actions and how she never intended for our wedding disagreement to result in such drastic changes to my living situation. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before I explained that the house sale was just the beginning of my new financial planning strategy. I told her that I had spent considerable time over the past few months reviewing all of my accounts, policies, and estate documents with legal professionals, and I had made several important updates to ensure my assets would be distributed according to my current wishes. She asked what I meant by current wishes, and I explained that I had removed her as the beneficiary from my life insurance policy, my retirement accounts, and my will. I mentioned that I had also closed the education savings account I had been funding for her future children since she had made it clear that she was ashamed of my financial background and didn't want my money to be associated with her family's reputation. The conversation got very heated very quickly after that. Sabrina started arguing that I was being vindictive and irrational and that I was punishing her for trying to protect her relationship with James' family. She said she had never asked me to remove her from my will and that I was taking her wedding decisions way too personally instead of understanding the social pressures she was facing. I asked her to explain exactly what social pressures required her to hire security guards with my photo and tell them I was a dangerous stalker. She got quiet for a moment, then said that James' mother had suggested the security measure because she was concerned about my emotional stability based on my reaction to their reasonable request about wedding attendance. When I asked her if she really believed I was dangerous, she said, "Of course not." But she had to show James' family that she was willing to prioritize their comfort and safety over my feelings. She said this was what married people do. They protect their spouses' family relationships even when it's difficult. That's when I realized that Sabrina genuinely believed she had made reasonable choices and that I was supposed to just accept being treated like garbage because her in-laws expected it. She kept saying that I was overreacting to what she called minor social adjustments that every family has to make when someone marries into a different social class. But James got on the phone at that point and decided to escalate things in a way I definitely had not expected. He told me that I was being manipulative and selfish by changing my financial arrangements just because I didn't get my way about wedding invitations. He said that Sabrina deserved her inheritance regardless of our current disagreement and that I was essentially stealing from his future children by removing her from my accounts. Then he said something that honestly made me realize just how entitled this whole family really is. He told me that his mother, Molly, wanted to schedule a meeting with me to discuss how we could resolve this situation like mature adults and that they were willing to include me in some family activities if I demonstrated better judgment going forward. I asked him what kind of better judgment he was expecting from me, and he laid out this whole plan where I would apologize to his family for my inappropriate behavior, agree to attend etiquette classes before any future family events, and restore Sabrina's position as my beneficiary as a gesture of good faith in our relationship. When I told him that was never going to happen, he said I was making a huge mistake because Sabrina was going to need financial support when they started having children and I was the only family she had left to help with expenses like private schools and family vacations. The absolute audacity of this guy talking to me about my money while simultaneously treating me like hired help was just unbelievable. But I stayed calm because I had been preparing for this conversation for months and I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I told James that he was welcome to provide for his own wife and future children without involving me since his family had made it very clear that my financial background was inadequate for their social standards. I mentioned that I was sure his mother's connections and resources would be more than sufficient to support Sabrina in the lifestyle she apparently expected. That's when Sabrina got back on the phone and started crying, asking me how I could do this to her when she was the only family I had left. She said I was going to regret pushing her away when I was old and needed someone to take care of me, and that James' family had been willing to accept me despite my background if I had just made an effort to fit in. But here's the thing, I wasn't done yet. The house sale and will changes were just my opening moves. And I had been planning the next phase of this whole situation since the day she blocked my number. Because it turns out that when you spend months researching someone's financial situation and social connections, you learn all kinds of interesting information about their vulnerabilities. And James' family had some very specific pressure points that I was just getting started with. Update 2. Alright, Reddit. You guys have been asking for more details about those vulnerabilities I mentioned. So, let me tell you about the research I did during those months of planning. Because when someone treats you like garbage, the smart move is to learn everything you can about their weaknesses before you strike back. First, let me address some comments from my last post. Yes, I absolutely plan this whole timeline deliberately. No, I don't feel guilty about it. And to the person who said I should have just walked away, walking away doesn't teach people consequences for their actions. These people needed to learn that treating someone like trash has a cost. So, here's what I discovered about James' perfect little family during my months of preparation. James works at a commercial real estate firm that his uncle George owns, but he's not actually a partner like he tells people. I found this out because I started following their business social media accounts and noticed that James is never mentioned in any of the partnership announcements or major deal celebrations. He's essentially a glorified sales associate who gets to use the family name to impress clients, but he doesn't actually own anything. More importantly, I learned that the family's financial situation is way more complicated than they let on. Molly loves to talk about their multiple properties, but what she doesn't mention is that most of them are heavily mortgaged. I discovered this through public property records. You can find amazing information when you know where to look and have enough time to dig through documents. The house they live in has a mortgage balance of over $800,000, and they took out a home equity line of credit last year for another $200,000. Their vacation property in the mountains has been on and off the market for 18 months because they can't find a buyer willing to pay enough to cover what they owe on it. But the really interesting part is how they funded Sabrina's wedding. Remember that $200,000 price tag that James kept bragging about? Well, it turns out they didn't exactly have that money sitting around. Molly opened 3 new credit cards in the months before the wedding, and George took out a business loan using the real estate firm as collateral. I found this information through a combination of social media stalking and some creative online searches. When people post constantly about their lifestyle, they leave digital trails everywhere. Molly loves sharing photos of her shopping trips and restaurant visits. And if you track the timing of her posts against major family expenses, patterns start to emerge. But here's where my research really paid off. I discovered that George's real estate firm has been struggling more than they admit. They lost 2 major commercial clients last year, and there are some ongoing legal issues with a property development deal that went wrong. The firm is currently being sued by investors who claimed they were misled about property values and potential returns. This lawsuit is public record, and when I read through the court documents, I realized that George had been using family money to try to cover the firm's financial shortfalls. That's why they needed loans and credit cards for the wedding. They had already spent their liquid assets trying to keep the business afloat. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to apply some strategic pressure. I started by contacting the credit card companies that had funded the wedding expenses. I didn't lie or make false claims, but I did share publicly available information about the family's debt-to-income ratios and the ongoing legal issues affecting their primary source of income. Credit card companies take this kind of information very seriously, especially when someone has recently taken on significant new debt. Within 2 weeks, Molly's spending limits were reduced dramatically, and she started getting calls requesting additional financial documentation to maintain her current credit lines. I know this because she posted about it on Facebook, complaining about how unreasonable credit card companies had become and how they were clearly discriminating against successful families. But I wasn't done yet. I also reached out to some of the vendors who had provided services for Sabrina's wedding. Not to cause trouble exactly, but to share some concerns about the family's ability to pay their outstanding balances. Because here's the thing. When you spend $200,000 on a wedding using borrowed money, you don't always pay every vendor immediately. The catering company was particularly interested in my information since they were still waiting for final payment on a bill that was supposed to be settled within 30 days of the event. The photographer and florist had similar outstanding invoices. And when I mentioned the family's current financial pressures, these vendors suddenly became much more aggressive about collecting what they were owed. This is when things started getting really interesting. Because James and Molly had to scramble to find money, they didn't have to pay bills they had assumed they could handle later. The stress of dealing with multiple creditors at once while trying to maintain their social image created exactly the kind of pressure I had been hoping for. Sabrina called me during this chaos, and the conversation revealed just how deep their financial problems actually were. She was furious that I had somehow caused problems with their credit and vendor payments, even though I explained that I had simply shared publicly available information with interested parties. She demanded to know how I had found out about their financial situation, and I told her that people who live their entire lives on social media make it very easy to track their spending patterns and debt obligations. I mentioned that when you combine public records with the information that Molly posts constantly about their lifestyle, it's not difficult to figure out that their expenses exceed their legitimate income. Sabrina tried to argue that I was stalking them and invading their privacy, but I pointed out that everything I had accessed was either public information or details they had voluntarily shared online. I explained that if they didn't want people to know about their financial problems, they probably shouldn't have taken out multiple loans to pay for a wedding they couldn't afford. That's when she told me something that honestly made me realize how completely delusional this whole family is about money. She said that James had assured her that their current financial challenges were temporary and that they expected to resolve everything once some of his uncle's real estate deals closed successfully. I asked her if she had seen the court documents related to George's business problems, and she had no idea what I was talking about. James had never told her about the lawsuit or the investors who were claiming fraud. She genuinely believed that the real estate firm was thriving and that their family's wealth was secure. When I explained the actual situation with the business lawsuit and the firm's financial problems, Sabrina got quiet for a long time. Then she asked me why I was doing this to her and whether I was trying to destroy her marriage by exposing information that could hurt James' family. I told her that I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was simply making sure that people who had treated me like worthless trash understood the consequences of their choices. I explained that when you call someone pathetic and hire security to keep them away from family events, you lose the right to expect protection from that person when your own problems start surfacing. But Sabrina still didn't get it. She kept insisting that I was being vindictive and that I should be helping her instead of making her life harder. She said that no matter what had happened between us, I was still her father and family was supposed to support each other through difficult times. That's when I told her about the other information I had discovered during my research and why her financial problems were about to get much worse than credit card issues and vendor payments. Because the really devastating stuff I found out about James' family wasn't about their current debt or business problems. It was about something much more serious that could destroy not just their finances, but their entire social reputation in ways they never saw coming. And that conversation is going to require a whole separate update because you guys are not going to believe what I uncovered about the source of their so-called family wealth. Final update. Reddit. I'm shaking as I type this because what happened last night was beyond anything I could have imagined when I started this whole revenge plan. You guys kept asking for the final update about what I discovered regarding James' family wealth. And trust me, the truth was so much worse than their current financial problems. But first, let me tell you about the messages that started flooding my phone at 3:17 a.m. Remember how I mentioned that the really devastating information wasn't about their debt situation? Well, it turns out that George's real estate firm isn't just struggling with a lawsuit. They've been operating a scheme where they inflate property values and take illegal kickbacks from developers for years. I found evidence of this buried in the court documents. But more importantly, I discovered that James has been directly involved in falsifying appraisal reports to secure larger mortgages than properties are actually worth. This isn't just unethical business practices. This is mortgage fraud. And it's been going on for at least 5 years based on the documentation I was able to piece together from public records and cross-referencing property sales with loan amounts. When I realized what I was looking at, I knew I had found the nuclear option I had been searching for. But I didn't want to just turn them into authorities and be done with it. I wanted them to suffer the same humiliation and financial devastation they had tried to inflict on me. So, I started making strategic contacts with some of the people who had been harmed by their fraudulent practices, families who had bought overpriced properties, investors who had lost money on inflated deals, other real estate professionals who had suspected something was wrong but never had proof. I spent weeks building relationships with these people and sharing the evidence I had compiled, not to encourage any illegal actions, but to help them understand that they had legitimate grounds for civil lawsuits and insurance claims against George's firm. Within a month, James and his family went from dealing with wedding vendor payments and credit card issues to facing multiple lawsuits totaling over $2 million in damages. Their professional licenses were suspended pending investigation, and their business assets were frozen by court order. But that was just the beginning of their problems. The night before last, Molly made a desperate post on Facebook asking if anyone knew lawyers who specialized in defending against fraud allegations. She was trying to make it sound like they were innocent victims of false accusations, but the comment section quickly filled with people sharing their own stories about suspicious deals they had been involved in. George tried to damage control by claiming that any irregularities in their business practices were the result of clerical errors and misunderstandings. But when you have 5 years' worth of deliberately falsified documents, that explanation doesn't hold up very well. James attempted to throw his uncle under the bus by claiming he had no knowledge of any fraudulent activities and was just following instructions from senior partners. But I had found records showing that James had personally signed off on multiple inflated appraisals and had received bonus payments directly tied to the extra commission generated by these illegal transactions. The pressure from mounting legal fees, frozen assets, and the complete destruction of their professional reputations created exactly the kind of crisis I had been hoping for. But I still wasn't satisfied because Sabrina continued to act like I was the villain in this situation. She kept calling me and demanding that I help them find ways to deal with their legal problems. She said that no matter what James and his family had done wrong, I was still her father and I had a responsibility to support her during this difficult time. She actually argued that I should provide financial assistance for their legal defense because family members are supposed to help each other. When I reminded her that she had hired security guards to keep me away from her wedding and had told them I was a dangerous stalker, she said those were decisions made under pressure from James' family and she hadn't really meant to hurt me that badly. But she still couldn't admit that their treatment of me had been completely unacceptable. She kept trying to minimize what they had done by saying they had just been trying to protect their social image and that I was taking their comments too personally. That's when I decided it was time to complete the final phase of my revenge plan. Last night at 2:30 a.m., I sent Sabrina a detailed message explaining that I had been the person who provided evidence to their legal accusers, that I had systematically destroyed their credit and vendor relationships, and that I had spent months deliberately planning their financial ruin as payback for treating me like worthless trash. I told her that every single consequence they were facing was the direct result of my careful research and strategic actions over the past 6 months. I explained that their mortgage fraud activities would have been discovered eventually, but I had accelerated the timeline and ensured that the maximum number of people were informed about their illegal behavior. I also informed her that I had updated my will again to specifically exclude her from inheriting anything, even if she somehow managed to repair our relationship in the future. I mentioned that the college fund I had been saving for her future children had been donated to a scholarship program for students whose parents work in blue-collar jobs like mine. But here's the part that really sent her over the edge. I told her that I had used some of the money from selling my house to hire a private investigator who had been documenting James' family's activities for the past 2 months. This investigator had uncovered additional evidence of their fraudulent practices that I hadn't found on my own. And this information had already been shared with multiple law enforcement agencies. 37 minutes later, my phone started buzzing with the most satisfying messages I have ever received in my life. Dad, why did you sell the house? That was supposed to be mine. How could you do this to me when you know we're dealing with financial problems right now? I can't believe you would be this vindictive over a stupid wedding invitation. The messages kept coming. Mom's lawyer just called and told me you removed me as beneficiary from everything. Your life insurance, your retirement accounts, even the education savings for my future kids. Dad, you can't do this to your only daughter. Then she started getting really panicked. James is freaking out because his uncle says they might lose their house if these lawsuits keep piling up. His mom is crying because their credit cards are maxed out and they can't pay their mortgage. You've destroyed our entire family over nothing. But my favorite message was the one where she finally started to understand the scope of what I had done to them. She wrote, I found out you're the one who contacted all those people about our business problems. You've been planning this for months. How could my own father try to ruin my marriage and destroy my husband's family like this? When I didn't respond to any of her messages, she started calling me from different numbers. Every conversation was the same. Her demanding to know how I could be so cruel to her, me explaining that actions have consequences, and her refusing to accept that their treatment of me had been unacceptable. The turning point came when she finally asked me directly what I wanted from her. She said she was willing to apologize for the wedding situation if I would help them deal with their current legal and financial problems. I told her that I didn't want her apology because it was only being offered now that she needed my help. I explained that she had made it very clear that she was ashamed of me and didn't want me in her life, so I was simply giving her exactly what she had asked for. She started crying and saying that she had never meant for things to go this far. That James' family had pressured her into making decisions she regretted, and that she still loved me despite everything that had happened between us. But when I asked her if she was willing to cut ties with James and his family completely to rebuild our relationship, she said she couldn't do that because she was married to him and they were planning to have children together. So, I told her that she had made her choice and now she would have to live with the consequences of prioritizing people who committed fraud over the father who had sacrificed everything for her education and future. The last message she sent was at 4:43 a.m. Dad, please don't do this. I know we screwed up, but we're family. You're all I have left, and I can't lose you, too. Please call me back. I deleted the message without responding. This morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 41 text messages from various members of James' family. All of them either threatening legal action against me or begging me to help them resolve their current situation. But here's the thing that makes this whole experience perfect. They still don't understand that I'm not the cause of their problems. I just made sure their existing crimes were exposed to the right people at the right time. James' family destroyed themselves through years of illegal business practices. Sabrina destroyed our relationship by choosing to treat me like garbage to impress people who were criminals. I just made sure they faced the consequences they had been avoiding for so long. And honestly, Reddit, I have never felt more satisfied with a decision in my entire life. They wanted to treat me like worthless trash. Now they know exactly what it feels like to lose everything that matters to them. Some of you might think I went too far, but I disagree. These people humiliated me, stole from innocent families through fraudulent business practices and expected me to just accept their treatment because they thought I was beneath them socially. Well, now they're the ones who are beneath me. And unlike them, I earned my position through honest work and careful planning. The house sale money is sitting in my new investment account. I've got a nice apartment downtown with no mortgage payments. And I sleep perfectly at night knowing that justice was finally served. Sabrina made her choice when she hired security guards to keep her worthless father away from her perfect wedding. Now she gets to live with that choice for the rest of her life. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people destroy themselves. You just have to make sure the right people know what they've been.